Hey gang, welcome back, and I'm going to show you, I was asked to give a speech at the Chautauqua Institution, which is one of the oldest gated communities in the United States. And a lot of very smart, very knowledgeable people have gone to speak here, and I was very honored and quite touched that they would ask me to talk about metal detecting at this location. So I'm going to actually just upload the video, and I hope you enjoy. Cheers.
YouTube channel, Amphibious Detectives, that you're welcome to go and sign up for. And he will be talking about the items that he has found in Chautauqua Lake over the last several years in his diving. Please welcome Patrick.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming. I look around and I see what might be a lot of various types of treasure hunters here. But what is treasure, right? I think a lot of us think of the ancient tombs of the pharaohs laden with gold and maybe perhaps a Sumerian pot full of gold coins. Or for a couple out in California, it was a metal can they tripped over on the hiking path behind their house that had over $8 million of gold coins. Down recently in Virginia, there was a farmer's field where they found significant cache of gold coins left over from the Civil War. But for myself, treasure is the stories behind the items that we find. It doesn't necessarily mean that what we find has to have some large value. So when I was a young kid, I lived on a lake called Ballston Lake, which is about 5.5 hours here just south of Saratoga. So there's lots of history there, like there is here. And we also had a railway trolley park on the lake as there was across the lake from this location. So as a little kid, I used to spend all my time in the water, because what else do you do, right? Hot summer day, 94 recently, right? And I would just fan around the bottom looking for anything I could find. This was life before zebra mussels in the lake. So now it's a little bit harder to do that. My wife in the back, who I met, 9 years ago or something like that, about 7 years ago, I was telling her a story about how back in the early 80s, when my parents had purchased the property we were at, someone took off their 3-carat diamond engagement ring and set it on the dock to go water skiing. The next person that sat down made a great story, because off it went and got flicked into the water. And I still haven't found it, but she suggested that I get a metal detector and try finding it. And that thought had never clicked in my mind that you could metal detect underwater. And that's really what inspired me to get into this hobby. And so from that, I had a father who was in failing health, and when I was very young, I used to do what was called coin roll hunting with him. So we'd get rolls and boxes of pennies, and we'd look for all the little wheat pennies in there. And I wanted to take him on the adventures. So I started the YouTube channel, and as he said, it's called Amphibious Detecting. And I do a lot of above and below water metal detecting and artifact recovery. And so something that I really find valuable is that these items we find all do have a story, and it's really related to where they were lost. I could go out and we can look for gold rings, and we can look for silver coins, and then have this huge accumulation of it over time. But what you lose when you do that is the tale or the life of the people that used to be there. And I think that's so important to share with people. And so that's why I got together with John, and we came up with this exhibit in the museum there, so that you can see some of the items that were lost just on the shorelines of the lake. And so some of those things tell stories about, the steamboats that used to pull up here, and others might have been the very early, others might be the very early life of when the SSA was formed. So things like that, if you had the opportunity to see that round baggage tag, that's pretty early in the existence here. And that would have been something that was attached to your luggage as you were ferried to this location. And then removed, you would have had a matching number. You would have got 47, I think it was, and on your way. We found one that was also from the Chautauqua Railway as well, which wasn't in that case, but it gives you an idea of the types of things that you could find out in the wild. Now, I've been all over the country doing this, and from battlefields on private property, right? If you look around the nation, there's historic national battlefields, and these are protected sites, and these are only accessed by archaeologists, and it's really important we maintain that. There's a lot of areas where this hobby, there's a line you're not supposed to cross, and that's one of them. Cemeteries is another one. Why would you do that? A lot of times, Cemeteries, you know, you might go and you might leave your wedding ring on a headstone for your partner. So these things are sacred areas. But going down in places like Virginia or South Carolina, we've had the opportunity to work with private landowners to detect some of those locations, and we found all sorts of crazy things. Someone asked me earlier what one of the most favorite things I had found was, and I had found a cavalry signaling bugle from the Civil War that was completely intact. And these things aren't found, but usually they're crushed as flat as a pancake. And the only reason I could suspect that this was actually all complete was they had dug out a pond. And so all the soil they spread around the farm fields and must have buried this thing. And this was almost 2 feet in the ground. It was an incredibly deep signal, you know. But the reason why I was able to detect it is just such a large item. So that is kind of like a brief overview of how I got into this hobby. But out here in the water, underneath, the things, as you can see in those cases, are so well preserved by the lack of oxygen in the bottom of the lake. When things sink down into the mud, it really helps protect them. On land, things get much more corroded, you know, because there's the constant freezing and thawing. Up here in the north, we put salts and fertilizers down in the ground. There's also the constant moisture and then drying. So things corrode pretty quickly in the ground here. Over in Europe, they find amazing things that are thousands of years old. But one thing you have to keep in mind with age and objects is the alloys and metals they used to use prior to, say, the 1600s are so elemental. They're one of their purest forms. And so once we start mixing metals together and creating fun alloys, they get a lot weaker in terms of corrosion over time. I think one of the biggest things that I fear for all of us in the United States is the rapid development of housing and commercial businesses and stuff like that, because what happens is there's all these great historic areas, and then the next thing you know, there's a 500-unit subdivision plopped on it, and nobody took the time to scavenge the grounds to try and recover the artifacts, to show them to the people that might live there and beyond. So that's something I think we really ought to kind of work more together on, is keep in mind. And I said as a vice chairman on a zoning board, and I was talking to somebody else earlier, it's like, yes, there are archaeological studies of a lot of these places, but what they're looking for is much older than some of this stuff that we found out in the lake. So that wouldn't necessarily change anything if it was found on the property, but it is important we rescue that stuff. And I do want to leave a lot of time for questions here. So I think that kind of gives you an idea of my background and the kinds of things that I do. But I really want to emphasize, like, all these really mundane objects, like a lamp wick adjuster or the oil burner, what have you, the little coin dispenser. Every one of those, if we keep them in a notation of where it came from, will help tell the story of that spot, which is super important. As a kid, my curiosity was playing around in the bottom of the water, seeing what I could find from prior life. And it just continues today. I'm very blessed to be able to go around and do this sort of thing in my spare time. Thank you.
So we look forward to receiving many questions. If you are wanting to ask a question, please raise your arm. And one of my staff or one of the ushers will come to you with a piece of paper and a pencil, and you will write out your answer and bring it up here, and I will read it out. I also want to tell people that if you want to find out what those items are, you can come to the archives. We will have the identifications of all of the items out there. And feel free anytime to come to the Oliver Archive Center. It's just down the road here at the corner of South and Massey Avenues. We are open from 10 to 3, Monday through Friday. If you read anything else or hear anything else, don't believe it. 10 to 3, Monday through Friday, the Oliver Archive Center is open. Please feel free to drop in, ask a question, look at things, maybe request some documents to look at. You're more than welcome.
While some of the answers are being collected, and not to cut you off, I see my wife writing something down, which gives me a great opportunity to tell you a story. My wife's a bit of a prankster back there. Now she's hiding behind one of the columns. And when I first got into this, her and her dad decided to take these aluminum plates that look like this, and he engraved York on every single one of them. And she scattered them around in the water for me to find. And she's horrible, because some of them, it would be like 3 of 25 And I know there's not 25 plates down there, but she keeps making me think there. So, yeah.
You know, when you were talking about the losing the ring in the lake, just after I got married, I was doing all sorts of jobs, but I moved a fellow out to Nova Scotia, and I was visiting a friend in New Breton, and we were out at the beach, and I went in, and I lost my wedding ring. It just, you know, water's cold, it just fell out. And in one swoop, I reached down, and this is the wedding ring.
You're very lucky.
It was in the sand, but somehow I was able to actually retrieve it. You don't know how grateful I am.
It's funny, we went on our honeymoon. We got married on July 8th last year, so we're approaching our first anniversary here. And we went to St. Lucia on our honeymoon, and of course I had to bring my detective gear with me, right? I figured, oh, I'm going to find my wife so many beautiful diamond wedding rings. This will be great. I found 0 female rings. I found 10 men's wedding bands. So I guess we know who won the ring. You know, who's smart enough to take them off?
We have some questions.
Absolutely.
Who is your favorite digging assistant? Also, your junior assistant.
So this must be the question for my wife. So we have 2 little cute dogs, Emmy and Sky, and so they help me sometimes dig holes in the yard, which is quite funny because obviously they're tearing it up. But generally speaking, when you're doing this activity on land, you want to be super respectful of people's lawns and stuff like that and try to leave no trace that you were there, which is important. I really enjoy underwater this time of year because obviously the heat, but all winter long I generally do detect and land and out in the woods and stuff like that.
Is there any difference between metal detecting on land versus underwater? And do you wear a special earpiece?
So underwater, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. On land, generally speaking, it's very straightforward. What your goal is to try and find where people used to spend their time. So there's different ways to do that. One of them is these metal detectors are designed to cancel out all the iron. And if you turn that ability off, and you listen to all the iron that's in the ground, the old nails, the pieces of sheet metal and stuff, you can see how there's areas where there used to be a lot more activity. And then you can turn the iron back off and sort of, try and figure things out. In the water, you have to think about the lake as the closer you are to shore, the more activity there was. So there's going to be a lot of iron and objects really close to shore, and the further out you get, the less activity there's going to be. And you'll still find it, but it's totally random, right? There's, near shorelines where activity was, but, maybe an old beach would be a lot of activity there, but further out, it's always going to be very random. So I hope that explains a little bit. It's a little bit crazy to answer.
Can you say a little bit about how you go about identifying the objects, and are there items that you and your friends have not been able to identify?
There's always some items that we really struggle to identify. Typically these are ones that appear more industrial in origin, and they're usually broken fragments of things. I spend a lot of time researching the items we find to figure out what they were. It's odd, sometimes I'll have 8 hours into finding what this little fragment of a toy car would have looked like as a complete object, and you're going off so little. But that's part of the fun of the experiment, right? When you dig something up, even if it's a broken piece, there's still a story you can learn from it. And what I really value these days is taking the time to do that research so that the people that do watch these videos I make can see that. They can see, oh, this is what it would have looked like, and they can get that vision, which is really the goal. But there are still things that are floating around out there that for sure I have not identified.
How far out to a lake will you go? Do you take a boat out, or do you just leave from the shore?
So it depends. I generally stay shallower than 20 feet as far as depth goes. Distance doesn't matter. I go more along the lines of depth, because once you go to a certain depth, then you have to worry about nitrogen building up in your blood the longer you spend underwater. And if I'm going to spend 6 hours underwater, then you can't really do it beyond 20 feet without some serious gear. So I I tend to stay shallower. That seems to be where more people spend their time. Certain lakes I've used boats to get to areas where, like an example is, if you're familiar with the Saratoga racetrack, Saratoga Lake has an area that's really shallow that attracts a lot of activity, but it's in the middle of nowhere in the lake. So everyone boats there. So that's how, yes, I had like side imaging sonar on my boat. It was fun. You could see sunken vessels underwater and stuff if you pass over.
Have you found any artifacts from indigenous people, particularly here in Chautauqua Lake, but at other lakes as well?
This is something that eludes me quite a bit. I have found a few points, a few fishing sinkers, but you know, a native fishing sinker is really like a flat stone, and you can see where they tied in the center and kind of filed down the center of the stone. Very rare for me to find that stuff. My eye, there's people that do that, and their eye is just like a hawk for that thing, and that's just, I can't quite train my brain, you know, the rocks all blend together, unfortunately.
Have you ever tried to return an item to its family or descendants?
Yeah, so here's an interesting story. So I was in a place called Charlton, and the woman who owned the house, she was mildly interested in metal detecting, so I got her set up, and we were digging around the yard, and one of the odd things about metal detecting is that if you have a gold ring, it sounds very much like one of those old 1960s, 70s, 80s pull tabs off the top of a can, and those things are everywhere. And so I was explaining to her, you know, hey, you need to dig these things up because you might dig 999 and then 1,001 this gold ring, and 2 steps later, I popped out this 1958 gold class ring that sounded just like a pull tab. But it was missing the school emblem on it. And so I had the initials, but I couldn't figure out which school it was, and so we were scratching our heads about it. And I thought, geez, you know, this is so strange. A week later, she sends me an email, and there was an obituary in the newspaper, and the woman whose maiden name were those initials, who used to be the neighbor, had died the day before I found this ring. And so I'm like, gosh, you know, I ought to give this ring back. She's like, no, you know, you might want to hold off on that. It's going to be a rough time. So I'm sitting in a place in next town over, and I just happened to meet this woman's grandson in conversation, and I ended up going back and giving him the ring, and so he wears it now as a memento of his grandmother. But yeah, if there's a way to identify who the item is, absolutely. A lot of times when I find stuff, if I'm on someone's private property, you know, I give them pretty much everything I find after I shoot the still photographs for the videos, because I think it looks a lot more interesting sitting on the mantle telling the story of the house than it does sitting in a treasure chest in my office. You know?
Just for that reason, too, that Patrick donated the artifacts that found on the lake to the archives. What happened to the bugle?
So the bugle, I'm not sure what's going to happen with that. It's sitting in my office right now. I probably will donate it to the Petersburg Museum. The reason it's sitting in my office is that this was an organized hunt. So there's these big organizations that will pay a private landowner, you can go detect on their property. And that's how I came by this, is the person who had the hunt recommended a restoration agency to preserve it, because this thing was paper thin. You know, 150 years sitting underground did not do it any good. And I sent it to the restoration place, and 5 years later, I finally had it back. So I got it back maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and so I'm kind of just like, oh, it's finally here. I never thought I'd get it back. There was some problem. I think that will end up back down in Petersburg, Virginia.
You mentioned about metal detectors, but are there tools that detect artifacts that are non-metallic?
Yes. So one technology that it's out there, it's just very expensive right now, is ground penetrating radar. And so they have these units that look almost like a lawnmower that you walk around, and there's a digital screen on it that will show anomalies in the ground. They're very, very expensive right now. My dream someday is that they're cheap enough I could afford one, but currently that is another technology. Are there more than that? I don't know. I'm not sure.
Can you tell us the 3 most impressive items that you have found?
You know, this is tough because it's like asking which kid's your favorite. But some things I found that were really interesting were, I found a artillery button from the Civil War that was in almost perfect condition. And they're out there, they're not impossible to find. But what was really interesting about it was, I'm in upstate New York, I'm not down in the South. And I was able to actually figure out whose button that was. It was a guy that lived across the street. So when he came back after the war, he must have lost it because I had his name right on the roster of the militia that were in that unit. And so you start going down the list, and the things you're able to identify based on who would have owned them is so important. And it's like the oddest way that I came up with that. You know, I was digging around this old foundation. The house had burned down in the 40s, and boom, here's his name plaque from General Electric. You know, so things like that are just that one's up there. I found a Morgan silver dollar in the lake, which they're hard to find because they weren't really circulated the way that you would think. But what was really important to me about it was, here it is in the trolley park in my backyard. You know, it was on Boston Lake I found that, and there was a trolley park there from 1904 to 1927, and it was clearly lost by someone who frequented that park. So that was really special to me. As far as a third, gosh, I don't know. I found my wife, but.
What about the cars that you lost in the lake as a kid?
Oh yeah, those were fun. You know, I was finding all my toy cars that I lost as a kid. You find generations of toys in the lake, which is fascinating. You know, a real cool one was I found this little pewter car, probably from the 20s, and it's an open-wheeled speedster. You know, it's just, I was able to find the manufacturing stuff. But.
I think we can guess from that answer, the answer to this question. Did you ever find any bodies?
Oof, no. Thankfully, no. You know, but oddly enough, I find a lot of bones and stuff when I'm detecting, because some of these spots, you know, I'm trying to think of what the name of this town was, and I haven't been back since, but I got an invitation to go to what was called Irontown, I guess. It's in the middle of the Adirondack Mountains. The only way to get there is to go about 10 miles on a four-wheeler, and it's on the top of a mountain. And it's a ghost town. There's nothing there, except for hundreds of old cellar holes. And what this place was used for is during the Civil War, they mined out the side of this mountain to create the iron, to build the ironclad ships. And so some of you start digging some of these holes, and it's like, well, this is a trash pit. So not only is there, you know, some lost relics like spoons and forks and what have you, but here's a ham bone, here's a cow bone, and they're preserved. You know, they're not deteriorated, which is always boggled my mind.
What is your theory on how the garter belt clip ended up in the lake? It was a world failure.
To be honest, that one, I thought the more fun question, because when I made that video about those items and I posted that a while ago, the one object people had the most fun theories about was that ID bracelet that said GIF on it. Because people were wondering, well, did they break up and the girl threw it in the lake, or was it lost? You know, someone said, oh, maybe she killed him and tossed the body in the lake. But the garter belt clip, you know, I don't know. I find those things quite often, and perhaps the person was sewing in their clothes and it snapped off, or it blew off a clothesline. I'm sure there's some other theories that are quite entertaining.
Well, you know, I have a theory about several of the items. Some people agree and some people don't. I think that several of the items actually are from fishing. You take the spoon, for instance, an old fishing gear, tables, boxes, and even today, it's not uncommon to see a spoon end that's used as a lure when you're fishing. And even the fork, and certainly the stud, would make a wonderful sinker, and maybe the garter belt holder. I don't know what it would use. Have you found other interesting fishing artifacts?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. Yeah. I find in the water, you find fishing gear absolutely all the time. And some of the more interesting things are what people have repurposed as sinkers. I find a lot of homemade sinkers where you'll see people cut them out of blocks of lead and then just hand drill a hole through this piece of square sinker. But you know, some of the lures, I bought a book at a garage sale recently just so I can be like, oh, this is what this lure is, and it'll be easier to communicate that with people if it's something that's well preserved, which oftentimes it is.
You have a YouTube show. Can you recommend other YouTube shows as well that might help people?
Sure. I have a friend, he's more into bottle digging. He's down in Alabama called Adventure Archaeology. There's a whole bunch around. I think probably the most popular one currently is Brad Martin with Green Mountain Metal Detecting as far as land detecting goes. There's another gentleman, I'm trying to think of what his name is. He doesn't post what his name is. But he is down on Long Island. He actually doesn't live on Long Island, but the majority of his hunts are there. And it's called Detector Comparisons. And he does a lot of 1880s underwater pier sites. So on the ocean and even out in these lakes a long time ago in the 1800s, it was very unpopular to actually go swimming. What people would want to do is they'd go out onto a pier, and out at the end of the pier they'd suspend these nets, and you'd just go float in the nets. And so people would lose their items through the nets, of course, but if you can locate where a lot of these piers were, where over the years hurricanes and storms and erosion has wiped a lot of them out, that's what his specialty is.
Can you recommend a metal detector for amateurs?
Depends on, so this is a really tough question because everyone's got different budgets and they want to hunt differently. You know, if you're looking for something that's affordable and you kind of want the best of both worlds, they sell what's called, a company called Mindlab builds what's called the Nextera. It's fairly affordable and it's good to 16 feet underwater, which I think 99% of your people are not going to go deeper than 16 feet in water. So you can walk around with a sand scoop and take it to the beach or take it to the park. That's probably the best recommendation right now as far as what's available.
Can you tell us where you found the items that you gave to the archives that are on display now?
Yep, so if you're on the road down here and you're looking at the bell tower, they're on the left-hand side in the water, all over there. Some of the items are further down, but they're all that direction.
Where do you think most of them came from? I mean, they obviously could come from boats, but they could also come from larger boats. They could also come from canoes or rowboats, or they could also have launched in from the shore, or from even where there was a garbage dump landfill, for instance. Do you have any idea where most of these have come from?
You know, looking at old photographs, it seems like that area was used a lot for picnicking and stuff like that. So I would suspect that some of the items were just lost, either getting on or getting off boats, perhaps, you know, swimming, things in pockets of that nature. Garbage for sure gets tossed in the water. People have a propensity to do that, you know. So if you break something, you get rid of it. Water has always kind of been a way for people in our past. Another thing, you know, you're talking about how Chautauqua Lake and other bodies of water around were used for transportation. One thing that often we forget is that in the wintertime these things freeze. And so a lot of people go out on the ice in the winter and do what they want to do. For me, I find a lot of horseshoes in the water. And I was finding horseshoes because my lake was owned by the Delaware Hudson Railway and they were harvesting ice up. So they're using draft horses to pull these large blocks of ice up and then throw a shoe every now and then. But I think here, you know, it's anyone's guess. We look at the item, the age of the items. We always look at the origin. We're not necessarily looking at when it was lost, because I could lose, you know, a medieval coin today. And oddly enough, I've been in a river in Troy where we found a Roman coin, and it probably was not lost during Roman era. It was probably something someone brought over and lost months later, even though it was very badly corroded. But we always try and find out when the thing was manufactured, because that's a known thing. We can learn that, but we can't learn when necessarily things were lost until you start getting into the battlefield sites or the gatherings of historic significance, where you can kind of piece that part together.
Do you work with local historians in the area?
Yeah, there's a park that's in my town. I probably have given this guy just pallets of stuff. It's crazy because the house was once owned by one of the richest people in New York, and Theodore Roosevelt used to go there. So everything I found at this location, I've given to the town historian, and everything from silver Spanish coins to silver buckles and fake gold coins and stuff like that. So he's got quite the display of things going on there. But I'd much rather people saw this stuff on display than, like I said, sits in my house. And that's the joy for me, is I can create these videos. So oftentimes a lot of the younger generation can experience the joy of discovery and the learning that comes with it through kind of my eyes than, if they were just all locked away or left to rot.
You were talking about where you found these artifacts. Have you explored other areas in the lake?
I plan to at some point. Thankfully, my wife's family, they're long time they're not residents here, but they have property here, and they've been here for a great number of years, and they're always kind enough to have me come here. So I certainly will expand my horizons, but I'm really passionate about the water that's in front of here because it means a lot to them and it means a lot to all of you. So I think that if we can put together even more things as time goes on, then it would be great to do it. Because, going back to that SSA tag, that might be the only one that exists that's left. Unless you have one sitting in the archives, I doubt anybody else has it.
No.
And a lot of these special, baggage tags and more mundane items that are more just utility in their creation can help tell such a powerful story of that early history and just a lot of it's lost. So.
Yeah, there's a nominal value to artifacts. You see something as simple as a baggage tag, and you know what it is. You read about the steamers and all that, but now it's real.
Yeah.
That is actually the real employee, I might say. Do you study currents in a lake? For example, we're talking about bodies. Well, that's kind of morbid, but there are a couple of places on the lake when a body goes missing where they know it's probably going to travel to in a certain number of days. Can you use currents to kind of understand the best places?
That would probably be pretty smart. For me, there's been so many instances where you have to kind of program your mind to not talk yourself out of going somewhere. And so if I rely on currents another technology that's out now is using LiDAR. So they have these satellites that take pictures of the Earth, and it basically strips off the organic layer and just gives you a topographic. And they're accurate enough where in the middle of a forest, where people haven't been for a couple hundred years, you can see the foundation left over from the house that used to be there and the stone walls. And so those are kind of clues that would lead you to an area. But I try and really keep an open mind. When I look for spots to go underwater, it really is important what the bottom looks like. In a river especially. In a lake, everything kind of is the same. There might be current that erodes, but it erodes in a way where people were still there even to today, so you can go there and figure it out for yourself. In a river, it's much different. You really need to look for the rockier, more bedrock areas, because all the little stones would build up so deep that, you could be digging someone's beer can at 2 feet down and it's no there.
What's the largest item you've found?
Well, with that side scan sonar, I found boats, but I haven't pulled any out of the water yet, so I don't know. That bugle was probably the largest single item I found. I found the closest thing size-wise. I found what's called a sad iron stove, and it looks much like a lantern, but it wasn't really. It was more of a heating source. So it's about this big, but same kind of idea, except the difference is the wick would be like that long versus a narrow wick to heat things up like an iron or a caboose was another thought at the time. Maybe because it was right next to the railway.
Have you ever been challenged by people to stop doing what you're doing?
Every now and then you get that, yeah. I think part of the fear is that some people get the idea it's kind of like stealing the past from people, and I think that's why it's important to share it. We don't want to let it dissipate and get covered up by modern homes. But you also don't want to go somewhere like a national battlefield and strip the earth of everything that's there. And, you know, I think we worked with, I can't remember the name of the group, but we went to the Bennington battlefield and they were having us go around with the detectors and just flag it. And then they would put a flag there, and they would, when they're finding bullets, they're measuring the trajectory of the bullets, and it helped change a little bit the story of the battle that occurred there based on the artifacts that were found. So I think there's an important balance that needs to exist. And yeah, I think that as long as people keep that in mind, then it's a great honor.
What was the scariest moment that you had searching for things underwater?
I had a snake coil around me once. A big snake, thought it was a tree, I guess. You know, I try and be really safe. So danger-wise, there's been some times I've been in the woods where you see a tree fall a little bit too close, stuff like that, but generally nothing too crazy. The ticks are the worst. They're the ones that get after you.
It was your wife that asked that.
What's that?
It was your wife that asked that.
Oh, jeez.
Are there any other questions?
She said I'm not allowed, she said I can die any way I want, but I'm not allowed to get electrocuted metal detecting. So, when there's a storm, I come in.
Are there any other questions?
You make more money on your YouTube channel or
I
You
mean,
make more money on your YouTube channel
I don't make
or
any
your
money.
teaching?
Yeah, so I don't have a monetized channel. I mean, my friends do. I'm very small. I'm not a huge YouTuber like some of these guys you might see, like Jay Kohler or something like that. My wife is monetized. I don't make money doing that, so yeah.
Do any of your students want to go with you, or have you ever your students?
Yeah, so
Do any of
that's
your students want to go with you?
That's fun because I teach at Albany, and some of the kids do want to go out. So after school, there's some big parks in Albany, and what's crazy about the parks in Albany are they've been around since the 1600s. So you might dig a modern quarter at 4 inches, and then 6 feet later, a Spanish silver real at 2 inches. It's just very odd, the distribution of stuff in those parks, because they dig up and run a cable through. So yeah, but the kids definitely get into it. Some of them, I try and not tell them about my YouTube channel, but some of them find out about it. The ones that do, sometimes they want to go out. And I got extra machines, so we do it.
Well, I want to thank you a lot, Patrick. It's really been a very interesting couple of days, and I'm so grateful. As I say, if you want to go...
You did so great. I love you.